validation, and specifically inline validation. Any fans of inline validation in the house? Like, you know, when you start typing and then it gets, hey, you made a mistake. You need to fix the mistake. Yeah, so we have a few fans. Let me see if I can crush your dreams as well. Well, we have three kinds of validation on the web, right? We have basically premature validation. Imagine you have a beautiful form in front of you. It's just loaded. And the moment you start typing in the field, it tells you you're wrong. You haven't even had a chance to type in anything. It tells you you are wrong. How friendly is that, right? Then you have immediate validation. That's just premature. That's too early. Somebody just focused on the input field. Giving them an error is just not cool, right? Then we have immediate validation. As a user types, sometimes we can have a threshold, and after a particular number of characters, we start validating. It's very difficult to get right. It requires quite a bit of logic. You need to do that for every single input field. It can be quite frustrating and annoying, especially because it's really hard to get it right. And then you get late validation when somebody leaves the input field, right? Then we're telling them, no, go back, you made a mistake, right? So let me ask you, which one do you prefer? Premature, immediate, or late? We have immediate or late. Well, definitely not premature, right? It depends is always the right answer, right? So we have late, a lot of lates, a lot of immediates. Well, let's take a look. Well, if we look at some examples, most of the time, all these examples are just really, really sad. So this is one of them. You start typing your email address, right? And again, I always do this. I always record a video of a user using an application, and then I go in slow motion, like really frame by frame, trying to see exactly what happened in the interface. It gives you much more insight than a heat map. This is at least my experience. When I actually get to see people struggling, and it's not like I enjoy that, but it's really useful to get some very useful insights, right? So people have started typing here, right? And so I'm typing wrong email, and then I have two @ symbols. No validation kicking in yet, right? That's just telling me, okay, keep going, basically, right? Eventually, I keep going, gives me even a little helper here. So I type in G and tells me gmail.com autocomplete, right? Okay, can you see? I think you can see the screen, right? So I made a mistake already. It doesn't tell me that I made a mistake because it hopes, I guess, that I will be able to recover from it, right? Okay, and then I go to the next input field. It tells me it's wrong. Please type in your correct email address. I'm in first name now because I'm using a tab key. So what do? I don't like mistakes. I want to correct a mistake, so I go back, right? So hold on, let's go. So no. So I go back, and then I'm being validated, or I'm being penalized twice. That's not fair. I didn't even have a chance to type in the first name. And that happens when you combine different kinds of validation: late validation, immediate validation, and potentially, at this particular case, at least premature validation. That's really, really frustrating. I didn't make any big mistake here yet, but it looks like I did two mistakes already, although that's not quite true. So what can we do here with this kind of validations? Well, we can make things a bit better. This just requires quite a bit of work. So because what I see companies doing is, if we want to have inline validation, well, we need to set a threshold of characters for every single input. We start validating only if that threshold is reached, right? If there is an error, like we saw with two @ symbols, we show it immediately as we detect it, right? Which means we need to test all the time as somebody is typing, right? We show success, the green checkbox, only if the user has moved to the next input field. If we edit a field that was valid before, then we validate after data entry. So imagine you have an input field, it was valid, somebody clicks on the input field to change it, right? And it becomes invalid. When do we validate? When do we show it? Well, they might be making some changes in the structure of the content and so on. So we want to validate once they have left that input field. And if we edit a field that was invalid, hopefully they're fixing the mistake, we want to validate immediately during data entry. So if there was two @ symbols in the email and they remove one, we probably don't want to wait until they hit kind of move to the next input field. We validate immediately, right? Does that make sense? Right. So, however, you can also make it way more complicated, or maybe actually easier, depends on how you see it, by not validating inline. How about that? What if we validate only on submit button? How are we feeling about that? Anybody? No inline validation at all, just submit button. When you click on the submit button or register button or whatever, only then you get to see the errors. Otherwise, we do not validate. Is it a bit late, says Alan? Could be. However, it's a bit more predictable. When I was testing it, actually, I was expecting that this is not going to work well. But what I learned is if you combine positive inline validation, mostly positive validation, right, with validating on submit, that seems to be working fine. And at the same time, if you know that somebody has made a mistake, really made a mistake, like where you have two @ symbols or so, then it's probably a good idea to remind them about that right away. It's a bit tricky, but I see some people saying, well, maybe we should actually just drop inline validation altogether. And it could look like this. So here's how it works then, right? Oh, hold on, I just jumped somewhere else. This is not where I want it to be. Wait. No, here we go. I think it was supposed to be a video, but it doesn't play. Well, too bad, right? But the idea is, well, you have your label, you have your input fields, and you kind of have this intermediate state, maybe the yellow, right? And then as you actually click on register, only then you actually show the mistakes. Again, I would challenge you to at least test how your UI would perform if you do not have any inline validation at all. It might be at least as good, it might be better. Chances are high you will need to have some positive inline validation. At least this is what my experience was, right? This would make the experience, the interface, much calmer, right? Compared to what we used to have previously. And you can make things really, really complicated again, because you will end up with a situation when validation isn't bulletproof. Because you will have, like, some of you might have been in this situation as well. You may be typing your address and you know that the address is correct, your shipping address, let's say. But the interface tells you, no, you're wrong. But you're right. You know you're right because this is your address. This is where you live. You've been living for the last years, right? You know that there are packages delivered to your address. So this is right. But the interface tells you, no, this is wrong. This is 100% abandonment right there because you will not be able to continue at all. This is it. You're locked out. And this is where you will lose some people, right? And so this happens quite a bit, actually, for things that are relatively complicated, like shipping addresses, just because maybe they have an old database, all right, that does not have your building, which was built maybe 5 years ago, right? And so it's easier when you have something like character count, when you have something like VET validation, maybe magic sign-in, SMS code, things like that. But you could do the same thing with the validate button too. You don't need to have inline validation there. A validate button could work perfectly well too, right? So these are all the cases that I could spot in usability research when validation fails, right? And that's too much for me, right? That's too fragile for me. Obviously, we have aggressive validators for address, phone numbers, or email. Sometimes services require a non-Gmail email address, but I'm using my Gmail as primary email address, so I'm locked out, right? Sometimes input is optional, but the empty strings do not pass validation for some reason. Sometimes you have countries with non-conforming or non-standardized TIN or VAT tax numbers. Sometimes you have ad blockers blocking the scripts that actually validate content. Sometimes you have tracking blockers blocking a location input prompt at all, and you're enforced to kind of, the interface wants you to give permission, but you cannot because you're being blocked, right? When the user doesn't have all the data, they cannot continue, they cannot save for later, right? And then you have browser extensions which block some parts of the UI as well. And it's really difficult. It's like you really need to make sure that your UI is so reliable to support all of those cases. And I'd rather go with a simpler path, if you ask me, right? So this is why when it comes to inline validation, maybe not, right? Okay, just saying, I don't want to crush your dreams still. I still have one more dream to crush. We'll get there.